All right. Well, welcome to the Donor Communities Training. This is our first training of 2022, and we're excited as the Community Foundation to be able to offer this. And we're really excited to have the partnership of Katie Davis. She has done some trainings with us before. She's well known in the community. She has a lot to offer as far as development, infrastructure, nonprofit management. And so we're thrilled that she is sharing her expertise with us today on how to engage your donors and build a fundraising community. So with that, I will kick it over to Katie.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. Yeah, today's format is more of a webinar format. So we are recording it for folks who are not able to attend because I think there were quite a few that did sign up. That being said, I am monitoring the chat box. I know Betsy and others are monitoring the chat box. And if there are questions during this session, pop them in the chat box. I can't see anybody's camera. I choose not to see anybody's camera but Betsy's and mine. So I won't be seeing you waving your arms or flapping your arms or whatever it is you do with your arms. So feel free to interject when there are questions, but just know that the format moving forward is less conversational and more webinar, and there is quite a bit of content in the next 55 minutes. So really quickly, I am a board member of the Community Foundation. My full-time job is working for an organization that provides capacity building services to support grantees of a family foundation in the Northwest. Super cool gig, love what I do. And one of the benefits is that I can share some of the resources we've developed over time with people, with the community, with you all for free. That's the best part. So the resources I share today, the links I share today, 98% of them are going to come from my work website called trec.org, trec.org. I will also try my hat at copying and pasting into the chat box. So if you all want to get on live, you can look as well. But it is there's a resource library tab. You can click on that and you could just geek out to your heart's content on whatever topics you want. So I'm going to take that hat off, though, and be the Chaffee County community member, wear that hat, and just think about this topic through the lens of being a community member, a former employee of many a nonprofit here in Chaffee County. And it's great to see some familiar faces from about 10 years ago when I lived here. I'm approaching this session a bit differently than I normally do, and I want to invite you all to drop into the space with me as well. I was thinking about topics and decided to talk about this one because oftentimes in smaller organizations, there are already so many points of intersection and contact with volunteers, and these points of contact are great places to build from. So I'm not advocating for starting something new. I am advocating very much for building from what you have, deeper engagement of volunteers, and moving them towards becoming donor fundraisers. So a little disclaimer, this session does include some navel gazing. So we're going to be introspective a bit, and it's going to be a lot less, here's what I suggest, here's a best practice, do this. So I invite you all also to expand your idea of fundraising, and remember, if you don't already know, that fundraising doesn't mean just raising money or asking for money. And we're going to talk a bit more about that as we go on. Everybody good with seeing the slides? Betsy, anything that I am missing in the chat box? And otherwise, I'll get going.
You are good to go.
All right. Put my water there. Great. The question of the day, should I invest in building community? And my guess, most of you would answer yes. And my guess also is that most of you are doing this in a lot of different ways. Donors that give more and help you raise money for organizations are not that hard to find. I think they're easier to find than unicorns, honestly. I'm guessing many of us have felt like we're alone in raising resources for small grassroots organizations. And a lot of that, especially in the last couple of years, when so much of this work has had to pivot and be done in a virtually bound world. However, many of the most successful giving programs that I have been hearing about that have thrived during this time have done so because they have explicitly engaged donors or engaged volunteers in their fundraising work. So how do you find and build these superstar pods of people? And these are communities that I like to call donor communities. It's what we're going to explore today. But first, I want to remind you, as I'm looking at my notes, that this, again, is not rocket science. It's not new. I'm not trying to sell you on it, but I do want to recap it just so that at least for the next 50 minutes, it's at the top of mind as you're thinking about your fundraising programs. So volunteer fundraisers experience deeper engagement, which may mean larger gifts. They bring in friends and their circles of influence, leading to new types of support. That provides opportunity for you and your organization to diversify your revenue streams. And my guess is grants are great, but we all may want to be a little less dependent on grants. And during times of extreme stress and volatility, cue a pandemic at this point, volunteers who are deeply engaged in the work create a more resilient organizational ecosystem that can navigate these challenging times. And a big reason, having folks engaged in donor communities is a whole lot less lonely. I know when I've been executive director and development director of really small organizations, I felt lonely a lot of the time. You know, I was doing the fundraising, I was doing the marketing, I was doing everything because it was a one-person shop. And so creating these donor communities helped to create a community that supported me, made up of volunteer fundraisers, and it made it a lot more fun and engaging. So again, not selling you on it, but just want to touch on why there is value in investing in building your donor communities. Really quickly too, when I'm talking about volunteer fundraisers today, I'm not talking about your board members specifically. I think it's important that your board is engaging in fundraising support work, whatever that may look like for your organization. If they are not, if they're completely checked out, I think that's for a future conversation and maybe like a future executive director forum that Betsy may lead with EDs in the community. All right, this is where I like to slow it down because I get excited about this stuff. I start to speed up. I end up packing way more in than I probably should. And so just a moment now to slow things down. Think about how we can make this donor community, volunteer donors a reality in our fundraising work. We know our strongest donors are people who feel both a connection to the work in the organization and to its people. So, right, connection to the organization and a connection to the people who are part of the organization. So the pause and moment of reflection here is think for a moment of one or two or maybe three of your top donors. They don't have to be top amounts, but maybe they're the top engaged. How do they show up for your organization? Why are they showing up for your organization? Are they experiencing your organization in a very hands-off way, or are they deeply engaged in your organization? I'm guessing that if they are major donors, they're not just writing a check and sending it once a year, that they are somehow engaging more deeply with your organization through various opportunities that you provide. So just like your big donors, volunteers are coming to an organization because of a cause, but they stay because they like the people they volunteer with. So think of a moment when you volunteered your time. I'm sure everybody has done some volunteer work at some time. Was any portion of what you might call your level of commitment to that organization related to the work, the mission, the program? Was it tied to how engaged and seen that you felt appreciated? Did you feel appreciated? In other words, did you feel part of a community? Now, also think about that volunteer experience and whether the organization engaged you more deeply, including in their fundraising efforts. And again, remembering that fundraising is not just about asking for money, but rather about being more transparent in sharing opportunities for involvement. So for example, really quickly, fundraising could be somebody is at a tabling event or at a, no, not at a table, at their own community HOA event or something like that. And they are able to start talking about the mission, the organization, the needs, and sharing that with their circle of influence. That's fundraising. So those kinds of things are what I'm talking about. And then fundraising more directly is definitely a volunteer who is also a donor, who is super engaged, knows about your organization's needs, and is able to, when the opportunity arises, to make a really explicit request for X, Y, or Z. If you, yeah, thanks for putting that in the chat box. Just pausing to look at that. Any comments or questions? And if you have anything to share in the chat box from that just moment of reflection about why you volunteered and whether in that volunteer role, was there something missing? Like I stopped volunteering because I didn't feel heard, or I volunteered more because they kept calling me and saying thank you. And I just loved the people that were involved in the organization. So super interactive. Feel free to write what you want in the chat box, and I will keep us moving in the direction of actually getting to the nuts and bolts of this. So we're going to touch base on the fundamental building blocks of establishing a donor community. So I want to start first off by clarifying what I mean by donor community, how it's both similar and different to a more traditional donor society or a legacy circle or something of that nature. And you'll understand more in a second. I'm going to lay out some steps to help you get started in thinking about donor communities, how you find donor communities, and how you can nurture and support the growth of that donor community. Again, I'm going to keep bringing us back to this main theme today is around deepening engagement. So we are looking for opportunities to deepen the engagement of our volunteers in a more strategic way, if I want to talk business, that leads to a greater return on investment. So a deeper level of engagement of a volunteer, more strategic way in support of our organization's fundraising goals, then leads to these new relationships and greater dollars and engagement. Okay, before I launch into definitions, this is a curiosity question, just more for me. And you can write A, B, C, D in the chat box. You can also choose not to disclose in the chat box. You do not have to. I am not suggesting by asking this question that you change what you're already doing. If you're engaging with donors through special communications and events, keep doing that. What I'm really highlighting by asking this question is a shift in perspective and framing about how you may talk about your organization and your work to donors, all in the name of supporting what I imagine for all of these organizations that are kind of one staff member, maybe 1.5 FTE. There's some real capacity constraints in your organization. So if you feel like popping it in there, which best describes your donor engagement at the present moment, I'm not going to read it, but I'm just going to walk through the bold section of each letter. So A, I put, we have a named formal donor society. B, I have down, we have a system for recognizing and thanking donors. C, our donors know our staff. Many of them know one another and spend time outside our events and with each other. And D, we've got ideas for all these things. We're just not there yet. The primary question that I'm asking by asking these 4 different questions or these putting down these 4 different statements is the question, who or what are you centering? Just meant to have you reflect on your current state of community in your organization. If you look at A and you move to C, so from A to B to C, you can see the arc of deepening engagement. So the A may be a formal donor society. B may be a bit more engagement. We have a system for recognizing and thanking. We interact with our volunteers. C is moving into, we allow space for our donors and volunteers to more deeply engage with the different aspects of our organization. We invite that in, we create the opportunities for that to happen. So that's the arc of engagement through this curiosity question. Great. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I don't need to go in the chat box because of our time, but thank you for those of you that did share, and hopefully all of you are able to read those comments. All right, we're going into definitions. So let's do this. Donor communities. I have two definitions here that I like to work with in my work. And as I share them, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a donor and then ask yourself, which of these sounds better to you? Would you rather be a member of a donor society for an organization who cares about animals, housing, arts, or part of a community who cares about animals, housing, or arts? Here are the two definitions, and I'm just going to pause so you can read if you would like, and I can take a drink. Okay, so donor society and community, and that question about there's no right or wrong answer, but which one are you drawn more to? When I started to explore the idea of community, donor communities versus donor societies, I was reminded of tomatoes, and I'm just going to tell you this story. It may resonate, it may not resonate, but tomatoes. So stick with me here. So, you know, I like tomatoes. I really like tomatoes. And there's a grocery store tomato that I could get in the dead of winter, right? I can just walk to Legree's or Safeway, get a tomato. I'll get some fiber out of it. I'll get some vitamins out of it. But it is a grocery store tomato versus in the summertime, walking downtown to the park in Salida, going to the stall at the farmer's market and picking up a tomato that the person right in front of me grew. Probably tastes a whole lot better as well, even worthy of biting into it like an apple. So same tomato. There's a tomato here, donor society. There's a tomato here, deep community, nurturing engagement. Produce this tomato. Again, that might be a stretch, but for me, that's what I was thinking about is this. It's not you're doing something different. It's you're shifting the perspective of engagement and donor and asking the question, who or what are we centering in our fundraising? Communities nurture connection. Societies may lean more to centering power in an organization. And what I mean by that is that in donor societies and fundraising programs where donors are really centered and those voices are elevated, you may lose that sense of community where there is multiple ways to engage with, nurture and connect with other people in your organization. So just be thinking about these two terms, donor society and donor community. And what I mean by donor community is that feeling of fellowship with others. What I mean by donor society is really a centering of the donor. No wrong or right, opportunity to shift perspective. That's what today is about. All right, so we've covered a bit about difference between donor societies and donor communities, and I want to touch now on what's the same, again, because this is not changing things that you're already doing. So in both the donor societies and communities, the strategies for engagement are the same. A couple of things that healthy communities have are a consistent focus on frequency of engagement, offering a variety of ways for engagement, quality of engagement. So an example of that is that I've played sports my entire life, and I've been dabbling still in doing adult league sports when I have time. And sometimes, and we're thinking about variety here, quality here, sometimes in league sports, you come in, you play the game with these other folks, like if it's kickball or whatever, the game's over, you win, you lose, you tie, whatever, and you go home. In other leagues, after the game, everyone goes out, they sit together, they have a meal together, they talk about life, kids, families, travels. You end up and I end up becoming friends with people on my team. I become friends with maybe some of my teammates' friends because of those interactions we've had. And out of that, other opportunities to do fun things, such as like a barbecue I get invited to, or a birthday party, or going camping or rafting. So those people have become part of my community and I a part of theirs because the quality of engagement has increased. So again, You could just have the like, we touch and ask and engage our donors once or twice a year, and that's it. That's all we have time for. That's working for you. That's wonderful. Or is there an opportunity to create some more quality interactions within your organization that deepen those levels of engagement? Simple adjustments to quality yield a higher return on investment if we want to talk in business terms, but it also, if we want to talk in non-business terms, it deepens relationships. Variety, let's talk about that one. You can help a community create community faster and make it more inclusive by simply offering a similar variety of opportunities to engage with, that folks can engage with. This has come up, I have noticed, and I'll share an example, is a lot of smaller organizations oftentimes revolve around breweries, craft breweries, because there's craft breweries in small communities and organizations, and they're very generous. And organizations are usually like, hey, we're going to host a happy hour or something like that. Not all of your volunteers may be interested in a more formal happy hour or some kind of happy hour. So thinking about the variety of ways that we provide for our donors and volunteers to engage, is it limiting full engagement from everybody? Another one, galas and formal events. If you do one fundraising event a year and the hope is that everybody kind of comes to that event or engages with that event, you may be losing opportunities for engagement with some of your other volunteers and donors. So the invitation there is just to maybe in your mind think through, okay, we are doing a whole lot of happy hours, but maybe we can create tea time, or we can create some other structure and engage some of the volunteers that may not be as, I keep using the word engaged with us. And then finally, appreciation. That one kind of goes without saying. So if you model appreciation with people sincerely and often and in different ways, that deepens people's connections to the community. Appreciation does not have to cost you a lot of time or money. And I'd say, one thing here, just for you to be thinking about, is how you are showing appreciation to your volunteers and donors. Are there opportunities for improvement, such as we could be more timely in sending out thank you letters, or we could be more timely in, I don't know what else you're doing for appreciation. So whether that's a call or a handwritten note, an email, a sticker, an invitation to an event, whatever it might be, just an opportunity to be a little introspective today, navel gazing, and thinking about, are we appreciating our volunteers and donors? Are we missing opportunities for appreciation? Okay, so now we're going to get to the fun stuff. Tools, yay! This is a stewardship matrix. I'm going to copy and paste, if I can, the link, which is on the Trek Resource Library page. And I think that I'll work with Betsy on getting these links out to everybody with the recording, or Betsy and Laurel with the recording after today's session. So if you missed the link and you're like, oh, I forgot it, then don't worry about it. It'll come in an email. This is a super simple matrix tool, and you may have your own version of it. This one is completely customizable if you go on to the site. I'm pretty sure we have it as an Excel format. So I want to walk you through it. You've probably used an engagement matrix without even realizing it. This time around, in the context of this conversation, I want to encourage you all to take some time with it and build it out, because it's kind of cool. I'm a fan of like one-pagers. One-page strategic plan, one-page fundraising plan, one-page stewardship matrix, one-page major donor portfolio or major donor plan. You can always build out from there. But having as much as you can on one page and being able to share that document readily with others, there's such value in that. So if it's like, I don't have time to create a fundraising plan versus I'm just going to create this one-page fundraising plan or this one-page stewardship matrix, don't worry about the other thing. Just get it done and get it onto one page. Okay, so on the left, I want to point, but I won't point, but you can hopefully see there is the column that says donor type and gift amount, and it is in blue, kind of a light bluish color. Those are the varying levels of giving of which you can customize to your own organization. Along the top in teeny tiny writing, you are going to see some examples of different ways that your organization may communicate and connect with your donors. And the X's are where you've decided to invite people into different spaces. So if I get in really closely, I will see a new donor welcome packet, a print newsletter, let's see, mission experience, personal email or call, small gift, personal call or meeting, volunteering, casual cultivation events, phone call from a board of directors, quarterly community newsletter, ED handwritten call or card, or community discussions or input meetings. And for those of you that are like, what's a mission experience? It could be, I think about some of you doing conservation and environmental work in the community, and you may take people out on a trail that you're trying to protect. Or if you are an animal organization, you may bring people in to meet, check out the cat room and meet the cats kind of thing. So that's what a mission experience is an experience for a person that aligns with your mission and work. So having something like this can help you map out the ways that you're engaging your donors, how frequently, whether you're offering, remember, that variety of opportunities to them, and helping you focus on quality contacts. And speaking of quality contacts, I want to highlight a couple things about this moving on. Those highlighted ones, which I just read, one of them, mission experience, but the other is volunteer, casual cultivation event, and community decisions or input meetings. In this case, those four that are highlighted are really, they are examples of where donors can meet one another. And so when you're creating your customizable stewardship matrix, if you across the top have everything in white, you may want to reflect on where there are opportunities for you to move some folks into yellow. So there's actually more interaction and engagement happening between your volunteers and your donors so that they can meet each other. Because it's those experiences that allow for that peer-to-peer connection to occur. So the idea here, again, not to create more work, it's to use what you already have in place. So if you're going to sit down and think about this, you're going to think, okay, if I have a staff happy hour once a month, let's see about inviting donors to join us once a month who fall in a certain monthly donor category. So that broadens their connections to others in the organization. They get to meet board, they get to meet staff, and they get to meet each other. Another one example might be if you have an event or activity that's easy to invite volunteers to, ask your program staff if you can bring a few the next time. So the thing that I will say with that is the more involved that you get your program staff in saying, yeah, volunteers can come, be cognizant of the fact that those program staff are there to do the program work. And so there needs to be somebody there from staff, a board member, to be kind of that volunteer liaison. So otherwise you're just adding more work onto your program staff's plate, and that's not the direction we want to go. And one more example is if you have staff, engage them in building community, ask them what they would suggest. My guess is if you have, in this community, if you have board members, they may lean more toward people that are later in their career or retired, recently retired, and just want to engage more deeply. If you have staff in your organization, my guess is they are earlier in their career. They may have different circles of friends and influence in the community. They may have a different perspective of involvement and engagement in the community. So if you haven't asked your staff about how to engage volunteers and donors more deeply, that's a great staff meeting conversation to have. Take 15 minutes, brainstorm, get a big piece of paper and have that conversation. And then come back and fill out your stewardship matrix. One more thing that I want to touch on with this is the giving levels. So those light blue sections on the left, which you can customize. This is kind of a side note, but thinking about moving away from donor centeredness and donor societies to more of donor communities, if you are publishing levels out in the community, like, our $10,000 and above donors where these people are, 5,000 and above where these people, I just want to challenge you to look at that, because there are leaders in fundraising that have been doing away with that practice to be more inclusive. And I can tell you from personal experience and working with organizations that have been intentional about that, that when they stopped publishing donor lists broken out by giving levels, so the names and giving levels, nobody said anything and they haven't lost donors over it. I am not saying don't name your donors. You definitely, end of the year annual report, you can have a wonderful 16 pages of donors who gave to your organization. I am encouraging you to think about the impact of breaking out donors by amounts and categories and how exclusive that may feel. Okay, there's one other tool, and then I'm going to move on. So this is just a plug for mid-level donors. And I thought about it as I was playing with this stewardship matrix. You may have a group of donors called mid-level donors who you don't have a specific steward matrix for. And I'm putting the link in the chat box. This is a webinar my colleague and I did. There's lots of great information and resources, but oftentimes like getting new donors in and our individual donors, and oh, we've got these major donors and these legacy donors and like these capital campaign donors, kind of like the middle child sometimes gets overlooked are the mid-level donors. So just be intentional about thinking of that group of donors in your organization, whatever that amount is. It could be $100 to $200, or your organization mid-level donors could be $1,000 to $5,000. Okay. I'm going to pause and have a learning lab moment. So as we were looking at this stewardship matrix, and I'm looking at the time, would anybody like to put in the chat box ways that you are bringing donors together or engaging them in their work? I know with pandemic and being virtual, it's been harder to be in person, but again, the highlighted sections on this matrix are where are those opportunities for donors and volunteers to engage with donors and volunteers. So curious if you feel like sharing with anyone else who's on here today, if you are doing something super cool that's bringing donors together and engaging them more deeply in the work. Just an offering there.
I can share some, this is Andrea.
Yes.
I can share something that we did last year that I would like to see us do again this year. Because things get so crazy at the end of the year, and often you want to be trying to express gratitude to all of the people all the time between November and December, and everybody's like completely overwhelmed. So we actually last year hosted a donor thank you event in March, and we did it kind of like a it was almost like a progressive. So we held it where you could go. We have 3 main sites. So we were highlighting the Grow Dome at the school farm, the Hutchinson Homestead, because we have a new classroom space there, and then the mill structure that's on the Hutchinson Ranch, that's Guidestones. And so we had snacks and a warm beverage, and it was generally outside. So it felt, like COVID friendly, generally speaking. And we had a like warm, yummy drink like mulled wine and snacks or something at each place that kind of represented the place, or soup. And then people could come to just one, and we had a board member and a staff person, at least one board member and a staff person at each site. So you could go to one site if you were just like, I really want to check out the dome, but that's all I want to do. You could just do that. Or you could go to all 3 over the course of the time frame that we had, and have conversations at each place. And so it was kind of a chance to be communal and chatty if you wanted to be, or be a little more safety cautious if you wanted to be. And so that was how we kind of tried to COVID adapt and thank our donors in a creative way. And I feel like it went over really well, and I'd like to see us do it again. So that was one way we handled that.
Love that. That's a perfect example of mission experience. And I love that you all took into account your timing and how things work for your organization. We're like, you know what, we're going to do something like this in the spring or in March rather than end of the year. Thanks for sharing that. Great. Okay, well, this slide, this is just going back to the subtle but important differences between more traditional donor centering and donor societies versus community centering. So again, centering the dollars versus centering the community, the impact, the work. I don't need to go through this list. You can kind of see what is tied to societies may be more centered and are more centered around donors. The one I want to point out just really quickly in the interest of time is the fragility bullet point, be fragile. I have had experiences where it's been unhealthy, where a donor who has given a substantial amount of money has had more of a voice in an organization than somebody that's given $5 or $10. And it took a lot more of my time to manage the relationship. It was a lot more challenging because there were boundaries that were blurred. So thinking about your donors and how they're currently engaging with your organization and whether there's some boundary setting there. And by boundary setting, I don't mean, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. It's that shift to community fundraising, donor community, rather than a focus on just a donor. So how to find volunteer fundraisers. This is the part I wanted to go through. There's 5 steps here. It should go pretty fast. You'll see paint a picture, craft your story, make your list, meet them where they are, ask for advice. Again, you are doing a whole lot of this already. Use what you're already doing and build up and out from it in a way that builds your donor communities. That's what we're going for here. So number 1, tribute to Bob Ross. First step is to paint a picture. So set aside some time to create your vision for the community you hope to foster. And this one lands squarely on your lap as a fundraiser. And it gives you an opportunity, if you are creative, to be creative. Nobody has to see this. There are some questions that prompts that I have that you can work through. The first 3 here, pretty basic. What is the purpose? What are we trying to solve? What would the world be like without this problem? And the last 3 have been really helpful in picturing how the engagement's happening, how the community is being built, and how it looks and feels down the road when we've decentered donors and recentered community in our fundraising efforts. I am so not an art person. I'm not I'm going to paint this beautiful picture, and I don't see things visually. I see words. I love words. And so if you're not a Bob Ross person, but you're more of a word cloud person, this is the best thing ever. There is a word cloud app. I'm sure there's like 50 million word cloud apps that you, putting in the chat box, this is just one, can go to and create your word cloud, which is your vision for the community. And what I love about this is that it makes an awesome sticker. It makes an awesome centerpiece in a donor card, or a donor piece that you're sending out. It makes an awesome thank you card, like getting these printed at Vistaprint or someplace, and this is the cover. So, don't recreate things. Don't try to force yourself into this, place of, I got to paint this beautiful picture of our community. Use your words. That's what my mom always said. Use your words and come up with a word cloud that you can use, that not only is in support of your vision, but that you can use in marketing materials. Next step here, craft your story. So this is where you get to share the picture you painted or the word cloud you created. And 2 things to highlight here that I just want to touch on is, again, using what you already have. So you might have case statements, impact reports, annual reports, newsletters, stickers, thank you cards. You might send videos out, like 1-minute videos of just, hey, this is the whole staff saying thank you, panning across the whole staff, holding up their word cards, something like that. Social media posts. What do you already have in place that you can use to share the story that you're crafting? And the second thing is a plug for accessibility. I find it fascinating in fundraising. And again, this is a rabbit hole that we will not go down. But right now, there are 4 to 5 different generations engaging in fundraising, and they all engage very differently. You've got the silent generation, you've got what do you have? Baby boomers, you've got X's, you've got millennials, which are Y's. I think you've got Z's. Like, everybody is engaging with your organization differently because of their lived experience. So this kind of ties to that stewardship matrix that I shared earlier. Thinking about those places that you can create more opportunity for different ways to access and engage with your organization. So that's just a plug for you to look at how you're doing things. And if everything's in writing and everything's using constant contact, and or if everything is like we just send year-end appeals and nothing else, consider doing something a little differently to see if you can engage in a different way. Remember that one slide that talked about variety. Make your list. I like this one. And the reason I like it, I'm just getting to my notes here. This is an opportunity for you to list all the types of resources your organization uses in its work or would love to have that it doesn't. Marketing help, advertising, office materials and supplies, animal care supplies, office space, a tractor, enrichment toys for youth. Like, what is your list? It's kind of like your wish list. Some of you may have a wish list, but the different thing about this is it's an activity to help support your fundraising priorities and more so to support deeper engagement of your volunteers and making them your donor community and your donor fundraisers. So you might come up with a whole list of things your organization is spending money on that may be opportunities for engagement with volunteers or donors. I know some folks, this is an invitation to you all to think about. Volunteers may engage with your organization first in offering up some in-kind thing like blankets or a computer or software, or hey, we've got some office space that you can use. If you have folks that are coming in and they're engaging with the organization through an in-kind donation, I invite you, if you are not doing this, if they're not engaged in any other way, like if I just came to one of your organizations and I hadn't been part of it and I said, hey, I've got this item, can I give it to you? What is your stewardship plan for engaging me more deeply as an in-kind donor to see if you can bring me in the door as a donor? Maybe the next time I come in the door, I offer up an item, but I also offer up $100 gift. So the invitation there is, if you do have a whole lot of in-kind donations, if you haven't thought through how to more deeply engage folks who are only entering through that in-kind door, there's an opportunity there. My favorite thing ever is that by sharing this list more broadly in one of the organizations I was working with, because we knew what resources we were paying for that we could use, we ended up getting a gas station that donated like gas for a year for the vehicles that we had. Side note about that, if you do not have not about gasoline, but about gift acceptance policies and what you will and will not accept, this could get pretty unwieldy. So I'm popping a link in the chat box here. This is a great place to start for creating a gift acceptance policy. If you do not have one, it can be super simple, but it saves you from maybe getting a vehicle you didn't want or a house that you didn't want. So side plug, think about creating a gift acceptance policy if you have not. Okay, so you've made your list. You've painted your picture Bob Ross style or Word style. You've crafted your story. You've made your list of items so that you and all of your staff know, hey, here are some ways that we could engage people in fundraising if they're interested in engaging more deeply. We are going to meet them where they're at. Again, remembering the themes today that I tried to weave throughout around centering community building. So rather than centering donor, which a lot doesn't change, but in your mind, hopefully you feel that difference of like centering donor, centering our donor community. The second theme, build off of what you already have in place. You're all doing amazing work. Andrea shared that fantastic example about, hey, here's something that we're doing. How can we build off of what we already have in place? And the main takeaway here is just about engaging your volunteers more deeply so that they understand your organization. They're engaged with others, not just with you, but they're engaged with that whole community that your organization creates. And they're willing to become fundraisers for you. And again, that doesn't have to mean they're out asking for money every time. They're spokespeople. They're talking about your organization. They're sharing information. They're getting people to donate in kind. They're telling people about your needs. That's what we're going for here. So that it creates space for you in your capacity because you're wearing like 6 different hats to run your organizations. So again, the same with meeting them where they're at. Use what you're already doing. You may have events and activities already in place. You may be out in the field where you're doing work. There may be events in the community that you show up at and you share more about your organization. They may be virtual. And I think the plug for virtual is, if any of you have noticed an increase in your donors and that they are not local to the area, you are going to want to create a stewardship matrix specific to that group of donors to deepen engagement. So again, you know, if I were in New York City and I engaged with Guidestone during the pandemic because I just love Salida and I know people here, what is the plan for Guidestone to continue to engage me in New York City so that I feel connected to the community and want to continue to help grow their donor community? And then rounding out I didn't put up the pretty slide of meet them where they're at, which is what I was just talking about. And the final one is ask for advice. Sorry, I didn't going around there. And what I mean by asking for advice is you are not inviting people out in the community to tell you what to do. You're asking for their thoughts about what they think you should do. And that it's different wording and it's subtle, but it is about engaging and bringing in versus, you know, telling me here's what we need to do. So some ways that you could do this and some questions you could ask, you could do a formal survey. If you haven't ever done a donor survey or a volunteer survey, there's value in doing that. You know, you can make it really interactive and fun where everybody that fills it out gets entered for a $25 Mika's gift card or something. But if that hasn't been something that you've done in the last 3 to 5 years, there's great resources. Reach out to me. I can just send you a pile of resources, and it may be something that you want to think about for 2022. You could have informal feedback sessions. You know, you could do whatever works for you in your organization, but asking questions to your volunteers to further engage them, such as, what do you think we should do? What does this community look like to you? What does it feel like to you? How are they engaging in the community? And if you hear back, you know, that's a great question. If you hear back and someone says, oh, I just send a check once a year and, you know, I don't always hear from you. That's okay. I don't always hear from you, but I know you guys are really busy. That's kind of a red flag for you to think about, okay, there's somebody who's been consistently giving without being deeply engaged. Is there an opportunity if we were to expand our stewardship matrix for this donor group to increase donations, deepen levels of engagement, and create a volunteer fundraiser for us down the line? I think, and I wanted to leave room for questions, and I did. I know I plowed through it. I think we are at the end, but before that, I just threw in some next steps. Inventory your current engagement opportunities and create your stewardship or engagement matrix. I used a different term there. It's the same thing. Stewardship just feels more formal. Engagement feels more community centered. So your stewardship matrix. Invite people along in everything you do if you can do so safely and relatively easily. And again, what I meant by that was there may be places where you can have people engage more deeply. Be sure that you have somebody designated to be the liaison if those deeper engagement interactions are happening, so that it doesn't fall more on your program staff or other people to do their work plus take care of donors and volunteers. Celebrate everything you're doing that aligns with your vision out and about in the community, and find ways to share with volunteers about deeper fundraising opportunities. And what I mean by that is thinking back to that wish list or in-kind list, or here are resources that we're paying for that if we didn't have to pay for, we would free up money for something else. Hey, volunteers, can you help us find somebody that's willing to donate office space? Hey, volunteers, can you help us find somebody who has a truck that's 5 years or less old that they wouldn't mind donating it? So that's what I mean by finding ways to share with volunteers about deeper fundraising opportunities, and then letting them do the fundraising for you. And now I'm pausing. More resources. I will send these out. These are different than what I put in the chat box. Yes. One is about engaging your board more effectively if you are interested in that topic. Remember, I touched on at the beginning that I wasn't really talking about board members today specifically. Another one is a prospect evaluation grid that will help you in your limited time identify the people or groups of people engaged in your organization and their return on investment, for lack of a better term, so that you are focusing your attention, your limited time and attention on where you might have the greatest return. So I'll send that out as well. Cut. All right, I'm going to stop there. I have not been following the chat box. Betsy and Laurel, I'll